published 0418 est, the 12th of December 2017, updated 0638 est, the 12th of December 2017. David Davis was accused of undermining trust today as the EU threatened to halt Brexit trade talks unless the gentleman's agreement on the Irish border becomes law quickly. Guy Verhofstadt, the European Parliament's Brexit coordinator, lashed out as it emerged the bloc's leaders are pushing for fast progress on writing the divorce deal into a formal treaty. The language in the statement, expected to be signed off at a summit on Friday, appears to have been beefed up in the wake of Mr. Davis' claim that the painstakingly assembled package was merely a statement of intent and not legally enforceable. Mr. Verhofstadt stepped up the row this morning by branding the Brexit Secretary's intervention unhelpful, saying MEPs would now call for the deal to be translated into legal text ASAP. The EU's chief negotiator Michel Barnier also vowed that he would fully support Ireland during the next phase of the talks. Mr. Davis was sent out yesterday in a desperate bid to clarify his comments, insisting the commitments to preserve a soft border between Northern Ireland and the Republic were more than legally enforceable. The Prime Minister defended her controversial Brexit divorce agreement in the Commons yesterday. Picture Ed Brexit Secretary David Davis left leaving number 10 last night was sent out to try and clarify his claim that the painstakingly assembled package was merely a statement of intent and not legally enforceable. He is pictured left leaving number 10 after a meeting last night, also attended by James Brokenshire Wright, the PM, and Jean-Claude Juncker struck the deal on Friday. Pictured, but there are fears it is already unraveling. Senior MEP Guy Verhofstadt also waded in today. Pictured, saying the European Parliament would insist on a legal text ASAP. His correction appeared to satisfy Dublin, who said they were happy he had acted to straighten the situation out. An EU Commission spokeswoman accepted that the deal remained a gentleman's agreement until it was written into a treaty. But there was deep irritation in Brussels at the gaffe, with a source telling The Times it was not helpful if people cast everything into doubt 24 hours later. A draft of the summit conclusions states negotiations in the second phase can only progress as long as all commitments undertaken during the first phase are respected in full and translated faithfully in legal terms as quickly as possible. Senior MEP Guy Verhofstadt also waded in today, saying the European Parliament would insist on a legal text ASAP. Remarks by David Davis that Phase 1 deal last week not binding were unhelpful undermines trust. EP text will now reflect this insist agreement translated into legal text ASAP. Brexit, he said, how can Britain be taken seriously globally if it behaves like a gangster in its international relationships? What is full alignment? In last week's Brexit deal, Theresa May agreed to keep the UK in full alignment with the EU on issues relevant to Northern Ireland. Remainers seized upon the language to say it meant Britain would be closely tied to Brussels, but ministers insist it does not mean Britain will be tied directly to the single market and customs union. David Davis said it meant Britain will meet the same outcomes, but not do it by just copying what the EU does. What is divergence? Brexiteers warn it would be a disaster to tie the UK too closely to EU rules. They want to allow for maximum divergence, distance from the EU, so Britain can negotiate better trade deals with non-EU countries. However, managing the border between the north and south of Ireland becomes more difficult the more the UK diverges from EU rules. For example, if Britain did a US trade deal to allow chlorine-washed chicken into the UK, how can you prevent the chicken being sold into the EU market? What happens next? Cabinet ministers will consider next week what the end state of relations with the EU should look like. That is, how much divergence they will seek. In theory, the more distance Britain seeks, the more restrictive its trade deal could be. Green MEP Philippe Lamberts accused the UK of acting like gangsters. How can Britain be taken seriously globally if it behaves like a gangster in its international relationships? He said. The remarks will increase pressure on the UK to negotiate details of a withdrawal treaty early in the new year before the terms of a transition and trade terms have become clear. That could undermine Mrs May's mantra that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister defended her controversial divorce agreement, dramatically struck in Brussels on Friday, in the Commons yesterday. Tory Eurosceptics have been generally keeping their powder dry until the shape of the government's proposed trade deal becomes clearer. But there are fears that Mrs May has already committed the UK to soft Brexit by promising to mirror some key EU rules in order to prevent a hard Irish border. Some MPs also voiced alarm at the prospect of paying a divorce bill to the EU of around £39 billion, although Mrs May has insisted no money will be handed over if there is no deal. The government is desperate to paper over the cracks at least until after the crucial EU summit, when the blocs leaders will decide whether to approve the start of trade talks. But delivering the annual Margaret Thatcher lecture at London's Carlton Club last night, Lord Lawson smashed the fragile truce. The peer, who has been urging the PM to leave the bloc with no deal and revert to World Trade Organization (WTO) terms, said the divorce deal was just about acceptable so far as it goes. But he added, "We find ourselves today quite unnecessarily as a supplicant. A humiliating state of cringe, begging for what is both unnecessary and unattainable, a posture which would have been anathema to Margaret Thatcher. The time has come to call an end to this demeaning process. We must get up off our knees. Enough is enough." Lord Lawson, who was Chancellor under Thatcher, said the government had allowed ourselves to become bogged down in the fruitless quest for a post-Brexit trade deal with the EU, wasting precious time and making concession after concession to try and achieve one. The EU's chief negotiator Michel Barnier also vowed that he would fully support Ireland during the next phase of the talks. Irish PM Leo Varadkar, pictured left in Dublin last week, said he was satisfied with David Davis' clarification yesterday. But EU Council Chief Donald Tusk, right in Brussels announcing a deal, has suggested the bloc might take a tough line over the transition and final trade deal.